Welcome, and thank you for joining our podcast today. We appreciate you being with us. Today, we're going to review some material that is found in Alma chapters 23 through chapters 31. In particular, as I read and reviewed and studied through our material, I was impressed with some things that I read in Alma chapter 26 and also Alma chapter 29. Let's take a look at some of those. In Alma chapter 26 it says, "And now these are the words of Ammon to his brethren, which say thus, My brothers and my brethren, behold, I say unto you, how great reason have we to rejoice? For could we have supposed that when we started from the land of Zarahemla, that God would have granted unto us such great blessings?" And then in Alma chapter 29, "Oh, that I were an angel, and could have the wish of mine heart, that I might go forth and speak with the trump of God, with a voice to shake the earth, and cry repentance unto every people. Yea, I would declare unto every soul as the voice of thunder, repentance and the plan of redemption, that they might repent and come unto our God, that there might not be more sorrow upon all the face of the earth." Now, those are a couple of really, really good scriptures. Our reading material is kind of littered of sorts with rejoicing from missionary groups. We had a little force of missionaries, if you've been reading along, that included the likes of Alma and Ammon, Aaron, Omner, Himni, Amulek, Shiblon, and Corianton. This little group of missionaries had tremendous success, and our chapters talk about their success and talk about their rejoicing. Today, I want to focus our history, our reviewing of the history of missionary work in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I want to share with you 4 of my favorite early church history missionary stories to emphasize what our chapters are referring to in our reading material. Let's begin with our first one. With the church legally organized and the Book of Mormon printed and ready for distribution, missionary work was now the priority, and Joseph turned to his younger brother, Samuel, to set the standard for the great harvest of believers. Now, Samuel was not only the first convert baptism of the young church, but it became also the first missionary. On June 10, 1830, Samuel H. Smith was called on a mission to, and I quote, "promulgate the Book of Mormon to the people in and around Palmyra." Well, Samuel will serve many missions, but he didn't convert anyone on the spot or have an opportunity to take them right through to baptism. But you're going to find out that Samuel was an incredible missionary. On one occasion, in fact, as Samuel was teaching, he was so roughly treated at the tavern that he ended up washing his feet in testimony against the tavern owner. Later, as he was returning home from his missionary labors, he stopped back at that tavern, and he learned that the tavern owner had been infected with smallpox, and he and 2 of his family had died. No one else in the neighborhood had become ill. Well, one thing Samuel had was perseverance. Undaunted, Samuel continued his missionary efforts. Little did he know the impact his tireless service would have someday on the church. The day he left the Book of Mormon with a Methodist preacher while laboring in the Minden, Bloomfield, New York area would bring the future of the church and change it forever. You can see on our map there's where the state of New York, and Minden's and Bloomfield area is right there in that particular area. Samuel had followed the old stagecoach line 30 miles west of Palmyra. Here he came upon a circuit preacher by the name of John P. Green. And he gave John P. Green a copy of the Book of Mormon and asked him to sell it to any interested party, and Preacher Green said he would certainly do so. Well, although Mr. Green was never able to sell the book, his wife, Rhoda Young Green, did take it from him and read it and was convinced of its truthfulness. Well, as Samuel was preparing to leave for home from serving here in the Minden and Bloomfield area, he stopped to rest and eat at what is referred to as the John Tomlinson Inn. The John Tomlinson Inn. It was a kind of a stagecoach hostelry and a dance hall at the time. Well, while there, a conversation then ensued between Samuel and another preacher by the name of Phineas Young. Here are Phineas Young's own words about what transpired that evening as they were breaking bread together at the Tomlinson Inn. In April of 1830, I was on my way home from the town of Alma, where I had been to preach. I stopped at the house of a man by the name of Tomlinson to get some dinner. While engaged in conversation with the family, a young man came in and walked across the room to where I was sitting, and he held a book towards me, saying, "There is a book, sir. I wish you to read it." Well, the thing appeared to me to be so novel that for a moment I hesitated, saying, "Pray, sir, what book have you?" "The Book of Mormon, or as it has been called by some, the Golden Bible." "Ah, sir, then it is purported to be Revelation." "Yes," said he, "it is a revelation from God." I took the book, and by his request looked at the testimonies of the witnesses. Said he, "If you will read this book with a prayerful heart, and ask God to give you a witness, you will know the truth of this work." Well, I told him I would do so, and then asked him his name. He said his name was Samuel H. Smith. "Ah," said I, "you are one of the witnesses." "Yes," said he, "I know the book to be translated by God, translated by the gift and power of the Holy Ghost, and that my brother, Joseph Smith, Jr., is a prophet, seer, and revelator." Phineas took the book home and studied it. He shared it with his brothers, Joseph Young and Brigham Young, as well as his father, John Young. He also shared it with his sister, Fanny Young Murray, who shared it with her daughter, Violet Murray Kimball, who shared it with her husband, Heber C. Kimball. By April of 1832, half of the Menden Baptist Church had joined the church, 65 of them having been baptized in Brigham Young's millstream. Brigham Young was baptized on April 15, 1832, in his millstream by Eleazar Miller. The branch met at the Tomlinson Inn, the dance hall having been converted to a meeting house. Now, it's interesting to note that although Samuel didn't know what ultimately would happen, it's incredible to see the names that are associated with what happened with one well-placed Book of Mormon. And it's also interesting that Samuel Smith was never censored in Revelation and ultimately died because of the things he believed. He was one of Joseph's greatest advocates. Our second story is about 4 remarkable missionaries that left an impact on the church that would never be forgotten. On October the 18th, 1830, about 6 months after Samuel Smith's efforts, Parley P. Pratt, Oliver Cowdery, Ziba Peterson, and Peter Whitmer Jr. set out for the borders of the Lamanites, having been called by the Lord as the church's first missionary group. As the group passed through Buffalo, New York, they left 2 copies of the Book of Mormon with the friendly Seneca Indians. When the elders reached Ohio, Parley convinced his companions to stop at Mentor and visit his old friend Sidney Rigdon. Now, prior to Parley's conversion, he had studied under Sidney Rigdon in Mentor. Sidney presided over a group of what is referred to as seekers, or New Testament Christianity people. At one point, Mr. Rigdon had merged his group with another seeking group presided over by a man named Alexander Campbell. Together they founded the Campbellites, or the Disciples of Christ Church. Later, Sidney broke away and formed his own church, the Reformed Baptist Society. Well, during those years, the hand of the Lord was with Sidney, helping to direct him in gathering many forceful, very intelligent men that would later become leaders of the Church of Christ. Well, as a minister, Sidney would not preach for money. To get around this, his congregation built him a new church, complete with a new home and a brand new farm. Sidney and his wife were just getting ready to move into their new home when the elders first arrived at his door. Well, the elders were treated cordially by Sidney, and he consented to read the book and allowed them to preach in his congregation. Their sermons were greeted with great enthusiasm and great belief. Sidney and his wife would never realize that new church, new home, or farm. They knew the consequences, but nevertheless, they requested and desired baptism. Meanwhile, the elders traveled down to Kirtland, Ohio, and preached door to door. On November 14, 1830, at the Methodist Meeting House in Kirtland, Sidney Rigdon announced his conversion to Mormonism. The next day, that would be November 15th, Sidney was baptized by Oliver Cowdery. Sidney's wife, Frederick G. Williams, W. W. Phelps, Newell K. Whitney, John Murdoch, Levi Hancock, and many others were baptized in the waters of the East Branch of the Shargan River in Kirtland. Later, Sidney Rigdon, of course, and Frederick G. Williams would become part of the first presidency of the church. Now, the four missionaries then continued their work at the farm home of a man named Isaac Morley. Mr. Morley, along with a group of 100 other people from Kirtland, had been experimenting with living in a communal order on his farm. Well, Isaac Morley and Lyman White and their families all accepted the gospel and were also baptized. In all, about 130 converts were added to the church in the space of 1 month in this Kirtland Mentor area. In December of 1830, Joseph received a visitor at his front door. It was Sidney Rigdon and a close friend, a man by the name of Edward Partridge. They had come to inquire further about the new religion. On December the 11th, 1830, Edward Partridge was baptized by Joseph and ordained an elder by his friend, Sidney Rigdon. Within a few short months, the church membership in Kirtland exceeded that of New York. And in January of 1831, at the Third General Conference of the church, the prophet received Doctrine and Covenants, section 38. And in it stated, "Go to the Ohio, and there I will give you my law, and there you shall be endowed with power on high." That's my second great missionary story. My third missionary story was realized on May 14th, 1948. This mission began in April 6th, 1840, as the apostles were setting sail for England. Orson Hyde and John E. Page were called by revelation to journey to the Holy Land and dedicate it for the return of the Jews. Well, as the missionaries were en route, unfortunately, Elder Page, he lost his desire to serve, and so Elder Hyde went on to Palestine by himself. He carried on alone for over 20,000 miles. At one point, he was assisted by a stranger who, after hearing his plight, gave him a small bag of coins to help him on his way. On October 24th, 1841, Elder Hyde built stone altars after the fashion of the Israelites on both the Mount of Olives and Mount Moriah, and dedicated and consecrated the land for the gathering and return of the Jews. In his prayer he said, "Now, O Lord, thy servant has been obedient to the heavenly vision which thou gavest him in his native land. And under the shadow of thine outstretched arm he is safely arrived in this place to dedicate and consecrate this land unto thee for the gathering together of Judah's scattered remnants, according to the predictions of the holy prophets." Orson then returned to Nauvoo in December of 1842. Okay, my last missionary story is more about what was accomplished by one very dedicated missionary. I'm a big fan of Wilford Woodruff. I'd like to talk with you just a little bit about him. On July 8, 1838, the 12 apostles, which included Wilford, were called to serve as missionaries in England. In January of 1840, Wilford Woodruff and John Taylor were the first of the 12 to arrive in England, and they hastened to the church headquarters there in Preston to meet with the mission presidency of sort that was there. There, they decided to separate. Elder Taylor returned to Liverpool with Joseph Fielding, and Elder Woodruff traveled with Theodore Turley to the Staffordshire potteries, so called because of the potteries industries that existed there. In the potteries, Elder Woodruff successfully organized several branches in the small towns of this particular area and placed Elder Turley in charge of them. In March, Wilford was inspired to go further south to the Herefordshire area, accompanied by one of his converts, a fellow named William Benbow. They contacted William's brother and sister-in-law, John and Jane Benbow, and a group of 600 people who had formed their own religious society that they referred to as the United Brethren. They had an opportunity to teach them, and eventually the leader of the group, a man by the name of Thomas Kington, and all but one of the 600 members accepted the restored gospel and were baptized. Hundreds of others in the vicinity also joined the church. Well, Although the work was very prosperous, the success did not come without obvious opposition. A local constable was sent to arrest Elder Woodruff for preaching without a license, but instead he was baptized following a very inspired sermon. On another occasion, 2 clerks were sent to discover just what was Wilford teaching. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they were both baptized as well. The clergy in the area finally wrote the Archbishop of Canterbury, head of the Church of England, requesting the use of his influence to ban the Mormon missionaries from being in Britain. Well, recognizing the law of religious tolerance in the nation, the Archbishop counseled the ministers to solve the problem themselves by becoming more dedicated pastors. Instead, the clergy preached anti-Mormon sermons and agitated the local press to harass the Mormon missionaries. Oppression and opposition grew as the church prospered in the area. While preaching in the village of Hawcross, Wilford Woodruff was surrounded by a very hostile mob. What some of the villagers at that particular time had requested, however, to be baptized, and Wilford told them that if they had faith enough to be baptized, he certainly had sufficient faith to administer the ordinance in spite of the threatened physical violence. Well, the small group walked down to a pond and was soon surrounded by a mob armed with stones. Wilford Woodruff recorded, and I quote, "I walked into the water with my mind stayed on God and baptized 5 persons, while they were pelting my body with stones, one of which hit me on the head and came very near knocking me down." On another occasion, the minister of the village of Dymock led a mob of over 50 in stoning a house where the saints were holding a prayer meeting. Well, although such experiences were really rather rare in Britain, they reminded Elder Woodruff that there was strong opposition everywhere against the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, through the efforts of Wilford Woodruff and those that helped him, 1,800 people were converted in a 3-county area of Hereford, Worcester, and Gloucester. So these 3 areas were really 1,800 people were converted to the gospel. They were very ready. Well, visiting the market town of Ledbury, Elder Woodruff was invited by the Baptist minister to preach to his congregation. Afterward, the minister and several of the congregation requested baptism. On another occasion, while he was baptizing, some ministers rode up in a wagon, and they gratefully accepted baptism and went on their way rejoicing. And then finally, reflecting on this extraordinary period of his life, Wilford Woodruff wrote, "The people were praying for light and truth, and the Lord sent me to them." All right. I got a little synopsis. I'm so impressed with Wilford Woodruff. Let me share this with you of his travels and his labors in Britain. He traveled 4,469 miles. He held 230 meetings. He preached in 53 different places, organized 47 churches, was responsible for the conversion of 1,800 people, held 14 conferences, blessed 120 children, and administered to 120 sick people. And he assisted in procuring 1,000 pounds of sterling for the printing of the Millennial Star. That would be the church's newspaper, as well as 3,000 copies of Latter-day Saint hymns and 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon. And then he was accosted by mobs on 4 different occasions. All right, I thought it might be fun to kind of dig into the archives of missionary work in the church just a little bit and share a few interesting missionary timeline facts for you. I think you might find these fascinating. In 1830, as mentioned, Samuel H. Smith is the first missionary of the church. Also 1830, Don Carlos became the youngest missionary at age 14. He accompanied his father, Joseph Smith Sr., to New York and Canada. In 1837, Mercy Fielding Thompson and Mary Fielding are called as the first sister missionaries to Toronto, Canada. Also in 1837, Heber C. Kimball becomes the first mission president, presiding over what became the British mission. 1844, Addison Pratt became the first missionary to preach a language other than English in the South Pacific. In 1881, Orson Pratt Sr. served many missionaries. He gets credit for having served the most. He served 25 missions. In 1893, George Q. Cannon published an article in the Juvenile Instructor stating that missionaries should not expect to be released at 2 years, but to serve as long as is needed. In 1898, the first single sister missionary is called, Amanda Knight and Lucy Brimhall. Both those sisters have dormitories named after them at BYU. In 1911, Lavera Wilcox became the youngest sister missionary at age 15. 1911, all missionaries should receive their endowments before departing on their missions. 1937, men called to English missions to serve 2 years. Those called to foreign missions, you get 2.5 years. From 1915 to 1937, Willard Bean and his wife Rebecca served the longest mission. Their mission lasted 24 years as they managed the Smith family farm in Palmyra. In 1940, all missionaries are to be interviewed by a general authority at a state conference prior to going to serve. In 1942, missionary farewells should not be held on a Sunday. In 1945, urgent requests made for missionaries who could speak Spanish. 1952, the age for males serving is to be 20 and females 23. In 1953, returning missionaries will no longer report to the general authorities. This report will now be made to the stake presidency and high council, as we do today. In 1960, men will serve at the age of 19. In 1961, the Missionary Language Institute is founded in Provo, Utah. 1969, mission duration is standardized. All male and female missionaries will serve 2 years. 1977, the first international missionary training centers are established in São Paulo, Brazil, and Hamilton, New Zealand. In 1978, the Salt Lake Mission Home is closed. That's where I went prior to serving my mission, and it was kind of crummy then. I'm glad to see it closed. Training all shifted now entirely to Provo in the Missionary Training Center. In 1991, the cost of serving a mission is equalized for all missionaries worldwide. In 2011, senior couples, they get to serve either 6, 12, 18, or 23 months. Also, their housing cost is capped for senior couples at $1,400 per month. 2012, men may begin their mission at age 18, women at 19. 2018, all future missionary calls will come by online delivery. No more envelopes in the mail. 2018, dress for women may now include dress slacks. 2019, missionaries are now allowed to communicate with their families using all forms of messaging. Previously, missionaries could only write letters or phone home on Christmas or Mother's Day. And then 2023, online training for missionary learning a foreign language is reduced to 1 week for 5 of the MTCs. Well, over the years, hundreds of thousands of faithful saints have received their calls. Latter-day Saints today hold a great debt to these missionaries that I've just alluded to from the past. They have created now, the church has created a database to honor these early missionaries and their sacrifices. The Church Historic Library, in joint conjunction with, or an effort with the missionary department, is offering access to what they call Early Mormon Missionary Database. This database has an individual page for every missionary who served at least 80 years prior to the current year. So currently, this includes missionaries from 1830 to 1937. I looked this up the other day to pull up my grandparents. Yeah, sure enough, there's a page on every missionary and where they went and what they accomplished. Now, every June, a new batch of data will be released, coinciding with the anniversary of Samuel Smith's first mission. Now, you can access this information by going to history.lds.org/missionary, and then just simply search for a name. Today, the church has 72,000 missionaries in 450 missions worldwide. This influx of new missionaries is attributed to President Russell M. Nelson's call for more missionaries in the April 2022 General Conference, when he said, "Today I reaffirm strongly that the Lord has asked every worthy, able young man to prepare for and serve a mission. Missionary service is a priesthood responsibility for Latter-day Saint young men. You young men have been reserved for this time, when the promised gathering of Israel is taking place. As you serve missions, you play a pivotal role in this unprecedented event. Well, I can say without a doubt that the couples mission that my wife and I served in 2018, when we were called to serve at the Joseph Smith Birthplace Memorial, was perhaps two of the most enjoyable years of our 50 years of marriage, and we look forward to serving again in a few years. Thanks again for joining me today. It's hard not to get excited when you read from Alma chapter 26 and Alma chapter 29 about the success of these young Book of Mormon missionaries and what they were able to accomplish. Join me next time when we will be reviewing material that is found in your Come Follow Me manual that'll be covering Alma chapters 32 through 38, and that would be weeks 30 and 31. So thanks again. We appreciate you tuning into our podcast.